this time, it is my pleasure to introduce your moderator for today, and that is Christina Cleveland, Senior Director, Talent Development Solutions at Canadian Management Center. She has experience leading global project teams through complex leadership development implementations and partners with CMC clients to consult through the analysis and development of their leadership strategies. Christina, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Jess, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar, Building Commitments to Ensure Success as it relates to Change Management. We're really excited today that we have over 1,300 people registered for the webinar from across Canada and also going around international boundaries as far as Taiwan. So we're very excited to welcome everybody today who's participating. For those of you who are returning to Canadian Management Center, then you are familiar with the fact that we do try to run these events at least on a monthly basis or as often as we can to bring topics that are of interest to our clients to you so that you can get up-to-date information on best practices and strategies to help improve your work environment. Now, Canadian Management Center is Canada's premier talent transformation company. We are celebrating our 50th anniversary this year and have been focusing on developing the next generation of leaders, so delivering open enrollment workshops across Canada, as well as programs in a virtual classroom environment through live online training, partnering with our affiliate in New York, which is American Management Association. So for those of you who are familiar with us, welcome back. For those of you, if this is your first time, please do feel free to check out our website at www.cmcoutperform.com to get more information. Now, during today's session, we are welcoming online participation with us through Twitter. So if you do tweet, feel free to tweet along with us today using the hashtag CMCEvents. Each tweet will be entered into a draw, actually, for an upcoming one-day change management workshop. So definitely keep any ideas and best practices in mind, and feel free to tweet along with us, again, using the hashtag CMCEvents. And as Jessica mentioned to you, we will be welcoming any questions from you through the Q&A panel for those of you who are participating in the live event. And we'll also be involving you today in the discussion. So we'll be asking for some input through the chat panel as well, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. So we'll look forward to hearing from you and interacting with you as the session goes on. After the session, for those of you who are participating online, you will receive an email with a link to a recording of the webinar so that you can revisit any of the details that we cover off today, and that will also give you a visual reference to the slides as we go through them. We are going to start off with just sort of answering the topic or the question why we focused on the topic of change management today. Clearly, with attendance of 1,300 participants, this is a hot topic and something that's on the minds of many of our clients. So as we kind of operate within our global workplace, we know that agility and resilience are absolutely necessary to being able to function in today's environment. We've got more frequent and faster organizational change, and the world is changing around us, so we have to obviously adapt to the way that we need to manage and lead through change. Organizations with more empowered workforces often mean more resistance during a change initiative. And really what this is referencing is the fact that top-down approaches to change management generally don't work anymore. We've set up workforces where we've empowered employees, we've asked them for their input, and during a change process, that is even more critical. So changes can be modest and continuous, or they can be significant and rapid. So we're going to explore some of the types of change that you've experienced later on in today's session and talk about different ways and opportunities that you can engage in order to be able to lead through that more effectively and to build commitment. Because ultimately it is people that are impacted most by the change, and it's absolutely people that we need to focus on in terms of managing and leading through the change. And those people can be your employees, but they can also be your customers. So if you're a leader that's participating in the session today, the opportunity for you is to be able to lead through this change while still maintaining positive levels of employee engagement. So I'm thrilled to welcome Jennifer Coles here with us today. We needed to bring you a subject matter expert on the topic, and Jennifer absolutely is that. Jennifer's been a CMC facilitator since 2007, and she has experience in change management, communication and interpersonal skills, management and leadership, as well as customer service. And she herself has actually built her own consulting practice and works with organizations like TELUS, the BC government, Shoppers Drug Mart, to actually work through change initiatives with that organization, so helping to plan and manage organizational change, and also working with leaders on the front line to help them implement those changes. So I'm going to pass the floor over to Jennifer so she can take us through today's session.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Christina. What we know from the research on change is that the #1 reason that change initiatives actually fail is due to people issues, which is why it is so incredibly important that leaders use change management processes and practices to help people deal with change. So that being said, let's talk about what we're going to cover off today in this webinar. Today we're going to be talking about the following. We're going to be talking about the need for change. And we're going to talk about the various roles and responsibilities that people can take on in the change process. We're also going to talk about how can you build commitment for change and how can you shift people's attitudes and behaviors. We're also going to talk about how do you plan and deliver effective communications around change, and we're also going to talk about how do you overcome resistance to change initiatives. So that being said, this is a webinar on change management, so let's talk about how we're defining change management. Change management is all about content, process, and people. And when we talk about content, we're talking about understanding the change and understanding why change needs to occur. When we talk about process, we're talking about all the activities that need to take place in order to achieve the desired result. And when we talk about people, we're talking about all the activities that need to take place in order to get people inspired to adopt the change. So now that we have a clear definition on how we are describing change management, let's hear from you. One of the things we know, given today's economy, given today's nature of business, we know that change is constant. So we know depending on what's going on with technology, the economy, and depending on what's going on with the competition, people are impacted by change on a daily basis. So we want to hear from you right now. What changes have you experienced at work in the last 3 to 6 months? We'd encourage you to enter in the chat feature the changes that you've experienced, and Christina is going to be monitoring the responses.
Yeah, absolutely. So we welcome your participation on the right-hand side of the panel. So you'll see that chat window in there. Feel free to submit any of your comments, and we're looking to hear from you in terms of what changes you have experienced at work in the last 3 to 6 months. So again, this is on the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and we've got some responses coming in. So we've had one person indicate merger and acquisition, new leader starting off, layoffs within the organization, so downsizing or restructuring obviously would initiate some definite changes. Potential budget cuts would initiate some changes. Office relocation. And again, we're just looking for your comments on the chat panel on the right-hand side of the screen on what changes you have experienced at work in the last 3 to 6 months. So again, some more relocation, new leader, new software, technology, someone starting a new job, restructuring, changing processes and business units, system changes, coworkers that are being released from the organization, new products, relocation, lots of relocation happening, change in office locations, change in organizational structure, regulatory changes. And then we've got notes coming in too about retirement, so a CEO retiring, employees retiring. So definitely lots of variety in terms of the types of change we're seeing.
Absolutely.
Okay. Great.
Okay, so thank you everyone for sharing the changes you've experienced. We're going to come back to those changes in a few moments. So we're now talking about managing change, and depending on what your role is, you can take on many different roles in the change process. So let's talk about that now. So there are various different roles in the change process. There can be a change sponsor, and this is usually the individual or group who is responsible for advocating for the change. And then you have the change agent. This is the individual or group who is actually responsible for implementing the change and getting people to adopt the change. Next, you have the change target, and this is the individual or group who must actually change their behavior. Last but not least, we have the change advocate, and this is the individual or group who wants to actually change, but often they don't have the power to actually make the change happen. For the purpose of this webinar today, we're going to be looking at the role of the change agent. So if you are the person responsible for change in your organization, you are responsible for managing the scope and the speed of change, and this is all about managing people. So the way in which we get people to adopt change swiftly is we get them to move through the change curve. And we want to do that as quickly as possible without impacting people's morale, their productivity, or their engagement. So let's take a look at what the change cycle looks like. I want you to think back to the change that you mentioned has happened to you at work in the last 3 to 6 months. And I want you to think about if you experienced these changes as we talk about the various stages that we all go through in terms of dealing with change. When confronted with a change, most of us start with denial. We're in denial that the change is occurring. We're in denial that we have to change processes. And often we continue to do things the same way that we've always done things. Over time, we then move into resistance, and at this point, we actively voice our concerns. We actively voice our resistance against the change. Okay? Sometimes people will experience anger and frustration in this phase. And then we move into exploration, and this is when we start to realize that the change is actually going to happen, and we start to explore, what does the change mean to me? What does the change mean to my role? And then we move into commitment. We accept the fact that the change is occurring, and we actually change our behavior. Now, you'll notice on the screen we have a blue dotted line, and that's the line of productivity. So you can see, depending on where you are in the change cycle curve, it can actually have an impact on productivity. And what's really interesting to note is sometimes when people are in the denial phase of the change curve, we'll actually see a spike in productivity. And the reason for that is often people want to show that the old way of doing things is actually the best. So again, we'll often see in that phase a big spike in productivity, and then it returns to normal levels. So let's talk now about the 20-50-30 principle and how we all deal with change. So depending on who we are, depending on our predisposition, and depending on our experience with change, and also, quite frankly, depending on whether or not we think a change will be beneficial for us, will dictate often how we respond to change. So in any change initiative, we normally see that about 20% of the population is change-friendly. And what we mean by this is that people are very responsive to change, people will advocate for the change, and people will be very receptive and try to get other people on board to commit to the change. We typically then see about 50% of the population that will be impacted by the change is usually fence sitters. And what we mean by that is that people are neither positive nor negative about the change. They are literally sitting on the fence. They can be convinced to go one way or the other. And last but not least, about 30% of people, when there is any change initiative, are resistors. And these people are actively opposed to the change. They will actively voice their concerns about the change that is taking place. So that being said, we now want to hear from you. Think about the last change that you experienced at work. What was your initial response? Were you change-friendly? Were you a fence-sitter? Or were you a resistor? So we've opened the polls now. Christina?
Yeah, so exactly. We've opened the polls on the right-hand side of your screen. You can select one option. And I think, one of the things that's important for us to note, too, is that resistance isn't necessarily negative in change, and I'm sure you're going to talk about that as well, and that we can all be in different buckets at different times. It really depends on the individual. It could depend on the change and how it's impacting you. So, being a fence sitter at the outset isn't necessarily a bad thing, right?
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. And again, we all need to work through that change curve, and it can all take us time depending on the scope and the nature of the change as well.
Yeah. We're seeing the responses come in, and right now it's looking like 69% of those on the phone are change-friendly. So all the change-friendlies are potentially participating in this webinar to figure out how we bring everybody else along. Or we might not want to put ourselves into other categories, but I think, it's about what our initial response was. Everybody could potentially move into a change-friendly zone, but we may start off on the fence not knowing until we understand more, or we could potentially start out resisting the change if we don't understand it, potentially. So based on me saying that, results have changed just a little bit. So I think we're going to close out the poll and just show you the results. So 68% are showing up as change-friendly, 24% as fence sitters, and 8% as being resistors in terms of the people we have participating with us today.
Interesting, and I have to be honest, I'm not surprised by that result, given this is a change management session, to see more than the average population being change-friendly. Would seem to be a logical conclusion because, again, we've got people on the line who are interested in change and obviously are very positive about change. So that would seem logical that we would see that poll result. And thank you, everyone, for sharing your thoughts. So let's now make the connection between the change cycle curve and change-friendly fence sitters and resistors. So as you can see on your screen right now, depending on your preference for change, it will dictate how quickly you move through that change cycle curve. If you are change-friendly, as you can see, you will move faster through the stages of denial, resistance, exploration, and commitment. Whereas if you are a resistor, again, it's going to take a much longer time to get through that curve. Now, if you're the change agent and you're the person responsible for change, your goal, of course, is to get people through that change curve as quickly as possible. So let's talk about how you get people ready for change and what you can do if you're the person responsible for driving change forward in your organization.
So before we jump forward into that, we've got a couple questions coming in, Jennifer, if that's okay?
Absolutely.
Just about this resistor category, and the question that's come in is, what does active resistance look like in the workplace?
Yeah, and that's a great question. Many of you, I'm sure, have experienced resistors in your workplace. Often it can be people talking about why the change is a bad thing, why they don't want it to happen. They're very vocal about the fact that the old way is the best way. And quite frankly, resistors can often sometimes kibosh the change. For example, if you've got a new technology, sometimes people will absolutely refuse to use it, and sometimes they will continue to use the old technology if it's still available to them.
Okay, so it could be just negative talk in the workplace, lack of adoption of a new process or procedure, trying to bring other people along into the mire in terms of the details about why this change won't work.
Exactly, getting people on board and to support their position as well.
Great, thank you.
You're quite welcome. Any other questions at this point?
No, I think we're good to keep moving along and helping people understand how exactly we move through the curve.
Wonderful. So let's talk about what you can do to get people ready for change. So what you can do is you can really get an appreciation for understanding how others will respond. And you can do that by thinking through, how much resistance will you encounter to this change? What are people's readiness for change? And what do you need to do to build commitment? So often when I'm in charge of leading change in organizations, I'll actually go out and ask the people impacted by the change in interviews or focus groups. How do you feel about the change? What do you know? What are you concerned about? And what information do you need in order to really adopt this change and feel positive about it? Another great way of sort of thinking through how people will be impacted by the change is to complete a stakeholder management plan, and we're going to look at that a little more in depth in a few minutes. So let's talk about some other things you can do to increase change readiness. Well, some of the things you can do is you can really help others to understand the need for change. So what we mean by that is getting people to understand what is the burning platform for change. Why do we really need employees to change their behavior. And we need to really indicate to employees the urgency and the importance of the change. So there's been some recent research out of late that indicates that about 70% of executives actually underestimate the need and the sense of urgency for change to drive people out of their comfort zone. People really need to understand what's the burning platform for change, why is this really important, and what's in it for me to change. And this should be communicated to employees at all levels of the organization. Employees also need to know what the change will be and what the change will not be, and what future behavior will look like. Okay? Change readiness should involve as many people as possible. Again, I'm a big advocate of interviews and focus groups, getting people's opinions and understanding what their concerns are about the change, and also clarifying people's roles and responsibilities in the change process, and what you are expecting from people in the future. So what will the behavior look like, and what are we expecting from people? How are we expecting them to behave when this change is implemented? So let's now look at a stakeholder analysis. Stakeholder analysis is really helpful for getting people to think through who are the individuals and the teams that are potentially impacted by the change, and what impact will the change have on different groups. Also, it's very helpful to understand what is the anticipated response to the change. So how might people respond or react to the change? And it's also very helpful in terms of gaining commitment and getting people to get on board in terms of supporting the change. So I mentioned I'm a big advocate of interviews and focus groups and going out and talking to people about the change. I'd just like to share a personal example where very much when we filled in the stakeholder analysis, we had a strong opinion about how people were going to react to the change. And when we actually went out and did focus groups, we discovered very quickly that we were actually wrong. So a number of years ago, I was responsible for leading a change initiative in a government organization. And in this particular organization, there were people who had been with the company for quite a long period of time. Many of the employees had been with the company for 20 to 25 years. And one of the things that this particular organization had never had was a performance management process. So we anticipated that employees were going to be really concerned. You know, they'd never been evaluated by the leader before, and here we're coming in and saying, yes, you might have worked for this organization for 20 years, but guess what? Now you're going to get performance-based feedback. So we were really concerned that this was going to be the real concern. It was going to be the real reason why people didn't adopt the change, because they were concerned about this whole idea of, again, getting performance feedback. When we actually went out and did focus groups and we asked people, you know, how do you feel about having a performance management process, and what are you really concerned about? We are amazed. What people were actually concerned about was less about the performance conversations, and actually it was more about actually using the online performance management tool. People were really concerned that they wouldn't know how to use the technology to support this new process. So when we asked in the focus groups what we could do to gain commitment and what we could do to get people really positive about this change, we were very interested and very surprised to hear that the one thing that they really wanted was classroom-based training on how to use this performance management tool, which was, again, very different than what we had anticipated. And quite frankly, it was very different information. We would have had a very different communication plan had we not gone out and talked to people about how the change impacted them. And I would strongly encourage you, for any of you responsible for change, going out and talking to the people impacted by the change is critical.
So can we just comment? There's a lot of great questions and comments coming in from the audience, Jennifer. So one person has just sort of commented, like, where do you categorize or how would you manage people who might accept the change, so maybe they're change-friendly, but are personally affected negatively by the change? There's a significant personal impact on that individual. So they're accepting the change, maybe adopting new practices, but they're not really happy at work.
And that can be a challenge, can it? So where are they categorized?
or I guess even how do you manage them, you know, and thinking about the fact that you're saying go out and talk to these individuals, but, you know, maybe it's that they're accepting the change, but they're personally impacted. You know, how do you get them to share that with you so that you get the kind of feedback that you've gotten through your experience?
Absolutely, and I think it boils down to communication, and we're going to talk about that in a few moments. The more you can communicate with people and tell them the what's in it for them and the benefit of the change, the more likely you are to, again, get them to that commitment stage and seeing the positive in the change.
Okay, so in some cases, though, resistance, or somebody who may be in a resistor category could be resisting because there's a significant personal impact, but you've got to be able to draw that out of them so that you can hear their feedback, let them know that they were heard, but in some cases it might just be what it is, but in other cases you may have an opportunity to influence or change the way you might be doing something.
Exactly, and sometimes simply speaking about the concerns can make people feel better about the change themselves. Like any of us, when we have an issue, sometimes getting it off our chest and talking about it can help us to see again and to feel a little bit more positive when we have a chance to voice our opinions.
Okay. And one other participant has sort of asked about whether or not there's an impact in terms of age or generation in terms of how they might adopt to a change. So you're talking about some long-tenured employees in the example that you gave, but how would the generational impact kind of fit into this picture?
I think it's a great question. I think it depends, again, on the nature of the change, depending on who we are and our experiences. I don't think we can eliminate it, certainly to age, if you will. It again, depends on the nature of the change. We might see, depending, again, on generations and depending on what the nature of the change is, technology, we might see some impact. But, again, it's all dependent on the nature of the change and people's experience with change and how they approach it. And again, like we saw from the 20, 30, 50 principle, depending on how you approach change as well, regardless of age, can also impact how you adopt it.
Right. Okay, perfect. So really, bottom line is that you have to do the analysis. So it's really not about kind of bucketing people into specific categories, because you could have somebody who you perceive to be change-friendly, but as you discover more information about them, if there's an impact on them, if they've had a bad experience with change in the past, if they don't understand the context for it, you really got to dig deep and find out what it is that you're dealing with through the stakeholder analysis in order to identify how you're going to move forward.
That's exactly right. All good questions. Are there any other questions that we should?
I think there's more coming in, but I know you have a lot of great information to share, so I'd say keep the questions coming, and then as we get those opportunities, we will definitely put them forward to you. And I do think we're going to open the lines now to be able to get some feedback from the group.
Absolutely, we are. So getting people through the change curve requires communication. You should be communicating about the change. So we have a question for you now up on our poll, and our question is, how many times do you need to deliver a change message before behaviors change? So essentially what we're asking in that question is, how many times do you think you have to communicate to employees about the change before they are actually willing to change their behavior? So is that A, 5 times? Is that B, 7 times? Is that C, 13 times? Is that D, 17 times? Or is that E, 22 times? We'd love to hear from you now.
Perfect. So we've got some responses coming in. For those of you who aren't sure where you should be looking, it's on the right-hand side of your screen. We've got this poll open. So responses are coming in. Majority of responses right now look to be that the answer is B, 7 times. But we'll leave it open for another 20 to 30 seconds just to make sure that we've got everybody participating and providing us with their feedback. But I think in the example that you provided too, the stakeholder analysis then influenced how you planned to communicate about the change. So not only do we need to plan how we're going to communicate it, we also need to think about how we need to reinforce our key messages. So I think, Jess, we're okay to close out the poll at this point. And it looks again, so majority of our audience, 38% voted B, 7 times, 24% of our audience voted C, 13 times. And what was the correct answer?
Interesting. So the correct answer is actually 22 times.
So 11% of our audience had that correct.
So this is actually quite a common result. Many people think that, just a few communications will change behavior, but based on the research on change management, you're actually better to over-communicate. And it seems that 22 is the magic number to really get people to change their behavior. So we're now going to spend some time talking about how do you communicate about a change. So when you're communicating about a change, there are a number of things that you really need to include in your communication. You need to share the change vision with people. People need to be aware of what does their behavior need to look like when the change is actually implemented. Because a lot of the times we'll say, you know, this change is coming, but we don't make it clear for employees. What are we expecting from you? How will you behave when the change actually happens? Because if people can see what you're expecting, they're, again, more likely to change their behavior when they understand what that change is. You need to build understanding. This all comes back to our points from earlier on in this webinar about what is the need for change? Why is it so important for the organization? And what's in it for the individual? And what is in it for the organization to actually have this change occur? Communication should also clarify personal meaning. Let's face reality, change can be hard for people. You need to clarify for each group, what does the change mean for you, which means you will communicate differently to different groups depending on how they're impacted by the change. And last but not least, you need to build commitment. We often see you build commitment, again, through communicating. This can be focus groups, or this can be through different mediums. So when you are communicating with people, you need to really think about what do you want the audience to know, okay? What do you want them to believe? What do you want the audience to do? And how do you want the audience to feel about the change? A lot of the time we talk about in change communications just about the process, but we don't address the people side. How do you want people to feel? You know, when we can acknowledge people's feelings and the impact of change, you're far more likely to get them, again, to buy in when you acknowledge the fact that people's feelings will be impacted by the change.
We have one participant commenting that, you know, if we need to communicate something 22 times before our behavior is changed, have we potentially framed the message correctly? So I think this, what you're talking about is focusing on message outcomes to make sure we're reinforcing the message that we're trying to get across. But I think the sheer volume of change, what people are dealing with in personal lives, their work lives, having that reinforcement on an ongoing basis within this same framework is what's going to help them to retain the information about what it is exactly you need them to do, what you want them to know, what you want them to feel, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talk about communications, we're not talking about communicating just through one medium. We're talking about communicating through a variety of different mediums. Because as you can imagine, 22 email messages obviously are not going to get read. You want to be communicating with a wide variety of different mediums. So a lot of the time when we have a change management initiative and we do those initial interviews and focus groups, we'll actually ask people, how do you want to receive communications about the change? Is that via email? Do you want to hear about it face-to-face? Is that text messages? Is that webinars? Okay? Do you want potentially posters? Do you want a job aid? What type of training is required? Because the more you can understand about the preferences of the people being impacted by the change, the more you can communicate to them in the medium that they would prefer. I'm a big advocate of creating branding for change management initiatives, so creating a look and feel specific to the change so that whenever anybody sees an email or they see a poster about the change, they can quickly recognize, hey, this is what it's about. And we often see we've got swag up there, and of course by swag we mean pens or desktops or, you know, notepads that have either a message or a tagline about the change. We often find that is also a type of communication vehicle that can sometimes be very powerful as well.
And so the delivery channels that you choose are really going to depend on what it is that you're trying to communicate, but also, I guess, it's probably scalable to the scope and size of the actual change, right? So the swag item might come into play if you've got a massive organizational change where you need to create a lot of awareness about it. It might not be a small change where everybody gets that sway kind of, but it could be a larger change.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, for example, we were doing some change with TELUS, and, so having a critter with a link to a website talking about the new technology was particularly impactful. Again, a cute little item, but a reminder to people as to the fact that the change was happening and giving them a little bit of information that kind of took them to the new technology. So we've been talking about communication, and communication will bring people, again, through that change management curve. Let's talk about when we see resistance to change and when resistance to change is greatest. So we often see people resisting change when change is unexpected and unexplained. So when people don't understand why they're being asked to change, and if it happens suddenly as well. People often resist change as well when their expectations about the change and the reality are significantly different. We also see people resisting change when change has a significant personal impact. If you think about yourselves, often when we have something that is quite personal and we know it's going to make a big change in our work life, often we can spend a bit of time in that denial and resistance phase before we're willing to move through that change management curve.
Look, a few people mentioned office moves or office location move. That is a significant change and would have a significant personal impact on people in terms of commute time or whatever arrangements they need to make in order to get to work.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then when change is in the form of new behaviors or responsibilities and it is really imposed and mandated without adequate explanation, when employees don't really understand why they're being asked to do these responsibilities, people will resist change. And also when people feel that their feedback and concerns either aren't being perceived or, quite frankly, are being ignored, often we can see a resistance to change. If I could just give a little personal example, on Tuesday I was actually at a client site, and the client was having issues. They had a consulting company come in June and recognize and recommend some organizational changes. And one of the recommendations that had been made by this consulting company in June was to merge two divisions together and to move them to a new location. So in September, they moved to a new location. However, they're having huge challenges right now because employees aren't clear on why these two divisions have been merged. Quite frankly, they're not trusting management, and quite frankly, they're not working well together as well because they don't understand why they've been brought together. So everything that should take place from a change management perspective didn't, and the leaders of this organization acknowledge that, and now they're looking to team building events and to doing focus groups and training about why are we together as a division and soliciting employee feedback because there is so much negativity and resistance to this change. And if they in fact had gone through the change management process, they would have been further along, and I believe they probably would have had commitment to the change.
So greater success if you can be more proactive, so less impact. But if you, for some reason, did not have the opportunity to move through the process, let's just say the change was really rapid. We have one participant asking about a situation where change had been implemented some time ago, but there's still resistance. Like, what suggestions would you have for them in terms of how they can convert that resistance into commitment?
Yeah, that resistance has to be addressed because at a certain point, if you're not getting commitment, you have to go out and ask people's opinion. Why are you not adopting the change? What is the issue here? Because sometimes and often employees have legitimate reasons for resisting the change. For example, there's a new technology and it's not doing all the things that the previous technology did. Often employees will have thoughts around, this is not working for me, and you really need to go out and actively solicit employees' thoughts and then address it. Change is ongoing. It's not just you implement change and you're going to get commitment overnight. There should be a sustainment plan in terms of how are you going to sustain commitment to this change and how are you going to get employees to adopt this change as well.
Okay. So your suggestions are to go back out to the individuals who may be in a resistance mode and ask for their feedback, draw out some of their concerns, and then try to find ways to address them.
Absolutely. They have to be addressed. If they're not addressed, those people will continue to be resistors, especially if it's a period of time.
Okay. So the continuation part on that question was whether or not some people are just not able to change.
So that's absolutely absolutely an interesting question, and I think the reality is we all have to change. We live in a society where technology is changing, the economy is changing, and competitors are often swift in terms of how they bring product to market. I think we all have to be open to change. Again, we all go through that change curve, but I think there comes a point where you do have to be willing to change or think about, what are the consequences of perhaps going against the change as well.
Yeah, well, and participants are commenting to that question as well, other participants, just about the fact that sometimes people aren't actually resisting the change, but they're resisting how it's being managed or the process around it and not really understanding the context for it, right, or the rationale.
Yeah, and I think that dovetails nicely into our comments around you got to communicate. In fact, it's far better to over-communicate than it is to under-communicate, because people do resist when they don't understand what's the impact of change and why are we doing this.
Okay. So resistance still seems to be a hot topic. There's more questions coming in. The topic of stress is coming up in terms of what happens to people's stress levels during periods of change, and what suggestions do you have for how you can get in front of that and be able to proactively manage the stress levels of employees?
Yeah, absolutely. The reality is change is stressful. Anytime we go through a change, regardless of what the change is, it's stressful. We have to change behavior. We have to do things differently. It means that we're actively thinking about it. So stress is absolutely a component of change. Again, the whole idea behind change management processes is you're trying to minimize that stress on the employee. And organizations who do change really well will often roll out change initiatives over 6 months. I've seen some organizations roll out change initiatives for as long as 2 years. That will help to minimize stress when people have a long period of time to go through that change management curve. Certainly the reality is sometimes that's just not the case. Sometimes you don't have a lot of time. I think, again, from a stress perspective, people have to be aware change is hard. They have to communicate to their employees, and they have to acknowledge the fact that change does have an impact on how employees feel and behave. And I think we should see at the management level that managers and leaders should be checking in with employees to see how they're feeling, how is morale, how is engagement as we go through this change, so that they're also assessing, are employees getting stressed, and what do we have to do to mitigate some of their concerns.
And so when you had talked about managing resistance and drawing input in from employees and getting their perspective, one participant is asking, is there a danger of asking for that kind of input because it might derail the process? Either it takes too long or the feedback that you get may be in opposition to the direction that you were trying to move in.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I would say in focus groups and interviews, you want to be clear on what your questions are. Don't ask for feedback on things that you know aren't going to change, because the participant is absolutely right. If you're asking a question, you're asking people for input into a change, and you absolutely know that the employee's feedback is going to have no input, because that's something that has already been decided. Don't ask the question, because if you ask for feedback on something and then you're not willing to consider employee feedback, you now have demotivated employees, and it goes right against the whole idea and philosophy of change management.
Okay. So someone's also asking about change fatigue. So if you have so much change going on in your organization, it could be small change, large change, but it's like constant, nonstop, and just showing no signs of letting up. How do you manage change fatigue?
Yeah, and I think that is a common occurrence here in North America. I think we're seeing a lot of organizations who are dealing with a lot of change. I think, again, how we deal with change is actually left up to an individual level. I think organizations have a responsibility to help employees go through the change, and certainly we as individuals have to be careful also of managing our own stress levels. But I think for many people, it's interesting. Here in Canada, we're hearing a lot about, burnout levels and whatnot, and a lot of that can be too, people are going through a lot of change, and we are seeing a lot of that. Certainly organizations have a role in terms of helping people to understand what needs to change and why. And I think at the individual level, though, we have to be conscious of our own stress levels and what we can do to manage stress and change ourselves as well when we're in an organization or a situation where we are going through a lot of change.
Well, because the Q&A panel is so hot right now, Jen, I think we should just stay on there and encourage everybody to continue to submit their questions, and then we'll come back to recapping the role of leader, if that's okay.
Absolutely. That sounds great.
So one participant is giving us an indication that they're implementing a new performance management system. The policy piece will be communicated in November, and the technology training will be done in February. So when should they be doing their stakeholder analysis?
Okay, so can you remind me again? Sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah. So they're implementing a new performance management process. The policy piece will be communicated in November, and technology training will be done in February. So when should that stakeholder analysis be done?
Now. And the reason for that is, again, the sooner you can ask people's opinion on the change and solicit feedback, the sooner you can get to that communication piece that this change is coming.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to draw everyone's attention to the Q&A panel that is on the right-hand side, but based on the questions that are coming in, I think you've already found it, so that's wonderful. One question coming in was, is there a bigger impact if the change is small versus large?
I think it all depends on how it impacts change at the individual level. So regardless of whether or not it's a small or a large change, if people's roles and their behavior are being impacted, you have to consider the change management curve. And again, get people's input, again, help them to understand the change. Because again, when people have an input and when people understand why change needs to occur, regardless of whether or not it's a big or a small change, they'll feel better about the change when they're well informed.
And so people coming back to asking about the communication channels that you referred to, and whether or not one communication channel works better over another.
So here's the thing I would say. Again, every organization is different, and employees are different. Depending on what organization you work in, the communication preferences will be different. So a lot of the time we can find in healthcare, we have people in the field. Voicemail tends to be preferred, whereas in many corporate environments, emails can be great and town halls. I would say there's no right answer on that. You need to go out and ask your people. Again, a lot of the time people try to guess and they say, okay, it's going to be email, it's going to be town hall. I would say ask your people, because by doing focus groups and asking people about the change, you're also helping them through that change management curve, because you're making them aware of the change and you're actively soliciting their opinion.
So we've got a participant asking a question that I think just sort of captures the reality of change today, but how do you handle a situation when you're implementing a rapid change, but not all of the factors about the change are known yet? So the example is a rapid technological change where the system is actually still being developed, but you know that you've got to get people on board.
Absolutely, and that can be tough, right, because you don't know what the final product will look like. I would say, regardless, it's still important to change. You saw that stat 22 times seems to be the magic number. Get people involved, get them aware. You might not be able to tell them everything, but you'll at least be able to give them a heads up that, hey, this is coming, and it's going to impact you.
Right. And so then there's people who are looking at situations where there may be in cleanup mode. So potentially a change has been initiated, maybe not effectively managed. Sounds like a situation like you're currently experiencing too. And there's a lack of trust with leadership because the change was poorly handled before. So what suggestions do you have for individuals now on how they need to come in and potentially clean up and get people on board to build commitment?
I think you've got to address the issue. You've got to address the fact that there is a challenge, and that can often be done either through, an all-day meeting. We often see people have gone through a change and they're still in that resistance phase. It's often good to address it. Let's talk about what's going on here. Let's talk about how we can work together. Let's talk about how we need to communicate.
So one participant is also asking about the company culture. So I think that kind of ties into, some of what we're talking about now in terms of the trust that might exist within the corporate culture and how that translates into what happens during periods of change. And somebody is asking for us to come back to the change principle, the 20-50-30, and whether or not the way we approach change or the ratio that might exist here could vary depending on the culture.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That is a great point, and the participant is absolutely right. Depending on the culture and the level of trust between management and certainly employees, that ratio can be very different. That 20-30-50 principle is based on sort of a general statement, but if you have a culture where people perhaps don't have a real level of trust with management, you can definitely see that resistor category change and get much higher.
Okay. And so if you are a frontline leader and you are responsible for implementing a change that is being requested or directed by upper management, but yet you're seeing and hearing resistance from your employee level, what should somebody who's in that sandwich do in terms of managing the feedback that they're getting about the resistance to change?
So if I can paraphrase, so essentially you're the leader and there is a change being implemented, and has the change happened or is the change in the process of happening?
Sounds like this person is relaying information on the change to their staff.
Okay. So is the person positive about the change?
It doesn't necessarily indicate positivity or negativity, but they're indicating that they're the middle person. So they're responsible for relaying information on the change to their staff from upper management, and the change, they know the change will be resisted or is being resisted.
Right, so here's what I would recommend. Get clear on what's the benefit. What's the benefit of the change, and what's in it for the employees to change? Quite frankly, I would also ask them, why are you resisting the change? What are your concerns? Because often we assume we know what people's concerns are. We can hear the rumbling. We know that it's not being accepted. You need to have those conversations, because if you have those conversations, you're going to find out quickly what are the concerns, and then you can address that.
And if they know the change is going to be resisted, how do they share that information upwards, I think is what they're trying to get to the crux of.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to have the courage to hear from your people. What are the concerns? What are the change? And communicate that upwards. Sometimes information doesn't get up to leadership, and sometimes, quite frankly, we need leaders to step up and explain to the organization why the change is so critically important, because again, I come back to that stat on the urgency for change. Most leaders underestimate the urgency and the real amount of communication you need to drive people from their comfort zone. So have the courage, talk to your leaders, let them know, hey, there's some issues here. Maybe it's town halls, maybe it's a voicemail from the CEO or leaders of the company letting the organization know why it's so critical that this change occurs.
Well, and it looks like our audience is on board with you. There are other people commenting, too, that the person in the middle needs to have the courage to let leadership know. So we definitely have some supporters. So if you ever ask that question, you've got some ralliers behind you so that you can ask get the feedback from those who are resisting the change or might be resisting the change and filter that information upwards in order to see some success.
Absolutely.
So, Jen, maybe we can take it to kind of recapping the role of a leader in the change process. Again, we've got really great questions coming in, but it all comes back to what you've been talking about, that it's the role of a leader to build commitment to ensure success of the change. So maybe you can take us through, again, just a recap of what the key competencies are and what we need to be doing.
Absolutely. I would be delighted to do that. So if you are responsible for leading the change, here's what you need to do. You have to help others understand what's the need for change, why is it important, what's in it for them, what's in it for the organization. Communicate clearly, okay? And communicate frequently. Lead the way in terms of shifting attitudes and behaviors by explaining to people, again, what are we expecting in terms of future behavior? And build commitment through communication, hearing people's thoughts, and addressing people's concerns, and manage resistance. When you know that there are people who are actively resisting the change, go out, hear from them, hear what their concerns are, and be willing to address it, or be willing to communicate up or down the organization as required. And I think the most important thing, too, is explain to people how you will expect their behavior to change in the future. So often we talk about change is coming, but we don't tell people exactly what does that mean for you, exactly how are we expecting you to change your behavior in the future.
Okay. So with the point about managing resistance, it's the role of a leader to manage resistance. So managing resistance doesn't mean ignoring resistance. So a participant is asking a question about how can you draw out information from resistors that will help them feel better in terms of getting out why they may be resisting the change, but may also contribute to management or leadership or whoever may be driving the change in terms of understanding what some of the challenges may be or what some of the pitfalls may be for a particular change. How can you use resistors' passion or resistance for positive?
Yeah, absolutely. I come back to this point that we've been talking a lot. The first thing is to address it and communicate and hear what's going on here. A lot of the time, again, people want to vent. They want to talk about why they're concerned. Sometimes simply by talking about it, they'll feel better about it. But again, you need to understand what's going on there. Why are they concerned? And you need to have the courage, again, to communicate that up or down the organization is required. But if you don't address it, it's going to continue. And it absolutely can sabotage your change efforts.
Okay. So you've got to draw it out, you've got to be able to restate it back, share the information, and then how do resistors potentially influence fence sitters is another question that's coming in.
We've all been in organizations where it only takes one or two people to get the rest of the population on board and not in a positive way. I think the reality is you want to turn those fence sitters and get them to that change-friendly approach, and that's where, again, communication is key. You want to address those resistors' concerns, but you also want to make sure that you're communicating to the masses about the what's in it. Why is this a good thing? Because in the absence of the information, most people will tend to see the negativity and tend to assume that the change is going to have a negative impact on them, which is why, again, communication is absolutely critical when we're talking about change.
So just talking about keeping employees engaged also, leadership and communication based on some research that Canadian Management Centre had done and released earlier this year in partnership with Ipsos Reid as it relates to employee engagement. When you're talking about keeping employees engaged during times of change, the two key elements are absolutely leadership and communication. So the model that is being displayed for everyone right now is really an engagement model that talks about framing the idea of communication, the role of a leader, and the role of senior leadership in engaging employees, and this becomes even more critical in a change situation where, as we've talked about, people are negatively impacted potentially. They want to understand how they fit into the change. They want to understand what's changing and what's not changing. And we did actually initiate an event earlier this year, which was about keeping employees engaged during times of change. So for those of you who are participating in today's session, actually we'll send you details on a rebroadcast that we'll initiate for that particular webinar, because clearly there's a lot of interest in the topic and desire to keep people engaged. But, Jen, your experience has been invaluable with the group in terms of sharing, and I want to thank everybody for participating in the Q&A panel, because that gave you an opportunity to give us some really great examples. But it sounds like, based on your experience, communication is absolutely key, and if you're going to do nothing else, communicate and have that be a two-way process.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, everyone, we are coming to the end of our time together today. Again, thank you so much for participating in the Q&A panel and providing us with your comments and feedback as well during through the chat panel and through the polls. We do have some upcoming sessions related to the topic of change. So we have a one-day change management program that will happen on October 18th in Toronto. And again, for anybody who is tweeting along with us today using the hashtag CMC events, up until 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll keep this contest open, so feel free to tweet about any key insights. You will be entered into a draw to participate in an upcoming one-day change management workshop. So if you are the selected winner and you're available on October 18th, looks like you might get some support sooner than later. And we also are asking for your feedback. So the topic of change was selected because we heard from participants about the importance of it. Tell us what you think about today's session. Tell us what you liked, what you'd like to hear more of, and any other topics that you're interested in so that we can shape our future events. But also feel free to visit our website for any additional resources as it relates to change and some of the challenges that we talked about today related to leadership, communication, and also employee engagement. So, Jennifer Coles, thank you so much for you sharing your insight and expertise with us. It was a really valuable hour. We so appreciate you spending the time with us.
My pleasure, and thank you for all the great questions today.
So we're signing off. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll look forward to seeing you again.